I think ivermectin is a depopulation agent used to genocide Africans and people in poor countries around the world. I'm going to show you some of the connections that led me to this conclusion in this video, and try to make a compelling case that people should be extremely cautious with the substance called ivermectin. We're going to look at the United States document called the World Population Plan of Action, or NSSM 200, the Kissinger Report, which is basically a secret declaration of genocide. We're going to look at the groups that it talks about: the WHO, the UN Population Fund, the World Bank, and UNICEF. We're going to talk about the objectives of this World Population Plan of Action, this sordid document. We're going to look at some of the studies showing negative fertility effects of ivermectin, showing it to be a depopulation agent. We'll be covering some statements from Merck, from the World Bank. We'll look at the WHO and the United Nations and Bill Gates' involvement. I think you'll agree that this is scandalous, extremely suspicious, and maybe you'll agree with me that this is outright criminal. Hey everybody, in this video I want to talk about Kissinger's World Population Plan of Action, which was a 1974 secret United States document, a very evil document if you ask me. An open declaration of genocide if you ask me, looking to cap the world's population at 8 billion. We'll also talk later on about Gavi. There's some connections with Gavi and the same players involved with sending tons of vaccines to many of the same countries targeted for the depopulation, who also received tons and tons of ivermectin. A big question here is, why would they try to save people's lives and alleviate suffering from the same organizations who have been tasked with reducing the population, capping the world's population through reduced fertility? So let's turn our attention to NSSM 200, the National Security Study Memorandum 200, from Kissinger and Nixon. And it seems very influenced by the Rockefellers. World policy and programs in the population field should incorporate actions to keep the ultimate level as close as possible to 8 billion, rather than permitting it to reach 10 billion. I mean, this is so evil. Actions to keep the ultimate level as close as possible to 8 billion. So basically what this is saying is we need world policy, we need world government. And what's the world government going to do? Prevent the human population from surpassing 8 billion. This is so evil. And look who they're tasking to do this. The U.S., as in the U.S. government, further offered to collaborate with other interested donor countries and organizations. For example, the WHO, so the World Health Organization, UNFPA, which is the United Nations Population Fund, the World Bank, and UNICEF, which is a very similar group to who's behind Gavi. By the way, to encourage further action by less developed countries, governments, and other institutions to provide low-cost basic preventative health services, including maternal and child health and family planning services, reaching out into the remote rural areas. Wow, so they want to cap the world's population at 8 billion, using the WHO, the United Nations, and the World Bank. This is evil. Concentration on key countries. Assistance for population moderation, so depopulation, should give primary emphasis to the largest and fastest growing developing countries. And they give a list here. Keep in mind this is in 1974. So this is how these were selected, allegedly. The largest and fastest growing developing countries. These countries are India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nigeria, Mexico, Indonesia, Brazil, the Philippines, Thailand, Egypt, Turkey, Ethiopia, and Colombia. And then it says bilateral assistance to the extent that funds are available will be given to other countries. So it's not just that list we mentioned. Considering such factors as population growth, need for external assistance, long-term U.S. interests, and willingness to engage in self-help. And then it says, at the same time, the U.S. will look to the multilateral agencies, especially the UN Fund for Population Activities, which already has projects in over 80 countries, to increase population assistance. It says this is desirable in terms of U.S. interests and necessary in political terms in the United Nations. So keep this in mind. They want to use the WHO, the UN Population Fund, the World Bank, and the UN Children's Fund, UNICEF. And they're trying to reduce the population. So this is one of the major goals of these organizations. And we're going to keep seeing these same names over and over again with ivermectin and the vaccines. Beyond suspicious. It goes on to say the World Population Plan of Action is not self-enforcing and will require vigorous efforts by interested countries, UN agencies, and other international bodies to make it effective. U.S. leadership is essential. And this dovetails into a very suspicious program by Merck to ship 4 billion plus doses of ivermectin, primarily to people of poor countries. According to this article from Merck, the program reaches more than 400 million people annually. Over 4 billion Mectizin 3 milligram tablets, so that's ivermectin, have been shipped to endemic countries by Merck since the inception of the Mectizin donation program in 1987. According to another Merck article, they claim the total ivermectin doses donated surpasses 4.4 billion, with the help of a public partnership between Merck, the Task Force for Global Health, and the WHO. And we'll also see the World Bank is heavily involved. Okay, so let's look at how this is funded. 4.4 billion doses. That is so much money. Okay, let's look at how these 4.4 billion doses were funded. It was, quote, with the help of a public partnership between Merck, the Task Force for Global Health, and the WHO. Let's home in on the Task Force for Global Health. Look at the major funders. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, CDC, the WHO, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, USAID, Pfizer, Merck, Johnson & Johnson, GlaxoSmithKline. But it gets crazier. Look at this. So it says here, the task force brought together the World Bank, the Rockefeller Foundation, the United Nations Development Program, the WHO, and UNICEF to raise childhood immunization rates, which they're saying that this task force increased over 6 years, from 1984 to 1999, by 60% globally, from 20% to 80%. So why are they spending so much money on vaccines and ivermectin to people they're trying to depopulate? And it looks like this was set up just in time for the Merck rollout. The Task Force for Global Health, founded in 1984. It says the task force works in partnership with ministries of health and hundreds of organizations, including major pharmaceutical companies that donate billions of dollars annually in essential medicines. So why are we seeing these same players consistently in shipping free drugs like ivermectin with negative fertility effects, according to numerous studies? Shipping free vaccines, very suspiciously, to these countries that Kissinger identified as being targeted for depopulation. Are we really supposed to believe that they changed their evil ways entirely, did a complete about-face, and now have the exact opposite motives and objectives? That's not what I believe. I think they're doing the exact same depopulation agenda, but under the guise of delivering safe and effective miracle products. So we really have to ask ourselves, is ivermectin a depopulation agent? Well, I found numerous studies indicating yes, it does impair fertility, making it a prime candidate for genocide and depopulation. So I just wanted to look at 3 of the studies again. I linked in this article, which I'll put down below, part 1 and 2 of the ivermectin versus fertility series. And there's more to come on that, by the way. But let's look at a few studies. The first one, called Adverse Effects of Repeated Doses of Ivermectin Alone or with the Combination of Vitamin C on Reproductive System of Female Rabbits. In this study, the researchers tested different amounts of ivermectin, along with vitamin C in some cases, and measured the number of offspring the rabbits beget. Quote, the results of fertility study revealed adverse effects of ivermectin therapy on fertility and blocked the pregnancy in all treated group except the 5th group, which administered vitamin C only, as compared with the control group. In conclusion, ivermectin has adverse effects on reproductive efficacy on female rabbits. This is a mind-blowing, stunning chart. We have 8 different treatment groups. The 2 groups on the left got no ivermectin. The only difference between these 2 groups is that control got nothing, and the second group got 50 milligrams per kilogram of vitamin C. For the remaining 6 treatment groups, they got different amounts of ivermectin and vitamin C, and we see this huge plummeting pregnancy rate. So for each of these 8 groups, there were 6 rabbits and 2 mating attempts. So the blue is the first mating attempt, the pink is the second mating attempt. We see the control group, 5 out of the 6 rabbits got pregnant, When they added vitamin C, 100% of the rabbits got pregnant. But then when ivermectin was put into the mix, fertility plummeted. Is this why they're shipping it to Africa? Is this why they're shipping it to Brazil, to Mexico, to the Philippines, to Indonesia, to all of these different countries with growing populations they want to suppress? I mean, this is horrifying. How many billions of doses they've shipped out. And then to look at this animal study, there wasn't a single successful pregnancy in any of the ivermectin groups on the first mating attempt. On the second mating attempt, with the lowest amount of ivermectin, there was 1 pregnancy. And then there was 2 when vitamin C was with the lowest amount of ivermectin. But that was on the second mating attempt. 0 pregnancies for the first mating attempt with ivermectin. This is massive. It also seems to suggest that it's dose dependent. So the more ivermectin, the less fertility. In this chart's the same data except for it's combined. So we just look at the treatment groups with no ivermectin versus the treatment groups with ivermectin. And what we see is a 100% drop off from 92% down to 0% pregnancy rate when the ivermectin's introduced. And for the second mating attempt, it's down 91% from 92% pregnancy rate with no ivermectin down to just 8% when the ivermectin is introduced. This is horrifying, yet I think it really elucidates why we're seeing this push to send billions of free doses of ivermectin to people being targeted for depopulation. This is really sinister. So let's turn to our second study, which is a rat study entitled Toxicological and Pathological Studies of Ivermectin on Male Albino Rats by Elzogby et al. So the researchers examined sperm count and percentage of abnormal sperm of white albino rats given ivermectin. Quote, significant decrease in total sperm count with significant increase in sperm abnormality was also demonstrated. And here's the chart. They looked at 24 hours after and 7 days after. They tried 0 ivermectin, a single dose of ivermectin, and a double dose of ivermectin. And look at how much the sperm count drops off for these rats. It goes down 57% after a single dose of ivermectin and 66% after a double dose 1 day after treatment. 7 days after, it recovers a little bit, but it's still significantly depressed. Down 6% for the single dose and down 52% for the double dose. And keep in mind with these people in Africa, they're giving them usually 2 doses a year. And think about how it's being pushed for COVID. Take this every week, take it every day for 5 days at a high level. That's what they're telling us, these ivermectin pushers. I think people need to be very, very cautious and really think about if you want to take this stuff before you dive in. The third study is a human study out of Nigeria. Very, very concerning. The paper is entitled Effects of Ivermectin Therapy on the Sperm Functions of Nigerian Onserciasis Patients. Quote, we observed significant reduction in the sperm counts and sperm motility of the patients tested. On the morphology, there was a significant increase in the number of abnormal sperm cells. It is suspected that the above alterations in the already determined parameters of the patient's sperm cells could only have occurred as a result of their treatment with ivermectin. So this first chart is the sperm count pre and post ivermectin. It's a scatter chart. If there had been no change, all of the dots would be on the yellow line. But it's very concerning because all the dots are below the yellow line, indicating a reduction in sperm count. There's maybe one exception on the line. And the next looks at a major factor for male fertility called sperm motility, which indicates what percentage of sperm are swimming normally. And with just 2 exceptions, all these other dots are below the line, indicating a significantly, in many cases, reduced percentage of swimming sperm. This is really concerning when we combine these 2 metrics, because there's the question of how many sperm cells are there, big reduction, and then what percentage of them are swimming. Massive reduction. So when taken together, this is very pronounced. All right, so we talked about the Task Force for Global Health, which involves the World Bank, the Rockefeller Foundation, the United Nations, the WHO, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the CDC, Pfizer, Merck, Johnson & Johnson, GlaxoSmithKline, etc., which has a ton of overlap with what we started with. The NSSM 200 Kissinger Report, which talks of using the WHO, the United Nations, the World Bank, and the U.S. government and other donor countries to cap the world's population at 8 billion by reducing fertility and maybe some other sordid tactics. Well, let's hone in on the World Bank and their involvement with ivermectin. I was able to find 2 documents from the World Bank concerning the mass ivermectin distribution program. So there's a number of interesting snippets I wanted to cover. They talk about screening of potential ivermectin recipients. And they say, only ask 2 questions. So the screening involves, quote, asking only 2 questions of women of childbearing age. Only 2 questions. So you don't want to ask them too much. You don't want to find a reason not to do it. So the 2 questions, is it possible that you are pregnant? Have you delivered a baby within the last week? And then it says people who are excluded from taking ivermectin based on the above criteria should be instructed when and where to go to get the drug at a later date. So just push it off a little bit. Wait till it's been a week since you delivered your baby. It's just so sick to me. Listen to the section on dispensing medication. Doesn't this sound really suspect? Each person should swallow the tablets in the presence of the drug dispenser. No one, and that's emphasized, no one should be permitted to take the drug away without swallowing it. So that begs the question, are they lacing it with something? Do they not want people to find out what's in these tablets? So I find that very suspicious. Don't let people walk away with this stuff. Make sure you see them put it down their throat. And then it says final instructions. A worker who is fluent should explain the following to each drug recipient. Quote, you should take ivermectin again in 1 year. If you have any problems in the next few days, then you should contact a local health worker. And the document also talks about not giving it to somebody who's like really sick, because it might make their problems worse. And that begs the question when we look at the so-called safety data, if that's really a representative population for who will receive it for example, COVID. I don't think it is. I also don't think they're really capturing all the side effects. So what's interesting is the World Bank brought up this article, which I've heard Dr. Kaufman reference before in a positive light. And I think this is a really sinister, suspect paper from this excerpt that the World Bank chose to highlight. This is from Marcia Angel. The recent decision by 5 drug companies to cut the price of HIV drugs in Africa was a good but small start. There have been other generous actions by drug companies, notably Merck's 1987 decision to donate millions of doses of ivermectin to treat onchocerciasis and lymphatic filariasis in underdeveloped countries. These are examples that the rest of the industry might do well to emulate in an organized way. Ooh, sends shivers down my spine. So here's some more excerpts from the World Bank's paper on ivermectin. To replicate a program such as Merck's is certainly a laudable goal, for this program is widely considered to be a highly successful example of private-public partnership in international health. How then should the pharmaceutical industry go about emulating this program? Should this be the model in all circumstances? Or are there characteristics of this disease, onchocerciasis, and this drug, ivermectin, that make this program unique? What are the critical elements that have resulted in this success? And then they list all of these other donation programs and the donated products. I think all of these should be investigated honestly. The oral polio vaccine, ivermectin, azithromycin, etc., etc. AZT. So a lot of drugs for HIV. Now this really jumped off the page at me. We'll also play a clip from a video from the World Bank on ivermectin's use for river blindness in a second. So it says, rather than diagnose and treat individual members of a community, like how actual medicine should work, rather than that, the decision to initiate annual treatment with ivermectin is made by performing a survey of the community members to determine what proportion has palpable onchocercial nodules. Do you trust them to properly survey the community? I don't. Once a threshold level of onchocerciasis is diagnosed in this manner, the entire community of eligible recipients is given annual therapy. This is really suspect. So they're not just treating people who are infected. They instead, allegedly, purport to run surveys and then extrapolate and say everybody has to take this once a year. What's really driving whether the population has to take the ivermectin? Could it be population growth? And then they talk about, quote, the benefits of such annual mass treatment and how it benefits both the individual and the community. Isn't that interesting? So we don't want to just diagnose and treat people on an individual basis. We're going to decide for entire communities that everyone has to take it every year. The World Bank then started talking about how Merck decided to hemorrhage all this money and send all of these free ivermectin tablets to poor people, which on its surface seems totally out of character for Merck. But I think we might be able to guess why they're actually doing it. So it says Merck had to decide how to use their ivermectin discovery. It first proposed selling ivermectin at market price of $3, but the people who could benefit from this medicine were the least able to pay. Next, it tried to find third-party payers, such as the United States government and international organizations, but was unsuccessful, even though it eventually offered to discount the price to just $1. Abandoning the drug was unattractive, both in terms of health benefits, denied to suffering people in Africa, and in terms of characteristics of Merck and its situation. Its corporate culture, its already existing donation programs, and also its image now that many knew of the existence of this breakthrough. Give me a break. I'm calling BS on this story. Reportedly, Merck paid little attention to the financial implications of this donation program. Oh, is that right? Merck was just like, oh, who cares about money? Let's just give all this free medicine to Africa with the help of all these groups who happen to also be trying to depopulate the world. Like, who actually believes this stuff? Merck finally chose in 1987 to donate the drug to all who need it for as long as needed. That's quite a decision, quite an announcement. From, yeah, we want people to buy it for $3 a pill, to, we will give it to everybody for as long as needed. Not even like, hey, we're going to see if this works. No, we will give it to everybody who needs it for as long as needed. And the World Bank document also talks about the Mectizin donation program and the task force that we mentioned earlier. And for some reason, Merck formed an external Mectizin expert committee, an independent group of experts in tropical medicine and public health. Oh, I wonder who they're affiliated with. It says the committee meets twice annually and consists of 7 voting members and 3 liaison non-voting members, representing the WHO, the CDC, and Merck. Wow. Their charter says that their main goal is to, quote, facilitate the earliest and widest possible application of Mectizin, so ivermectin, in public health programs, consistent with good medical practice. So the next thing I want to play is this World Bank river blindness ivermectin video. Tries to scare people about, oh, you're being invaded with parasites, the mosquitoes or these flies are going to transfer the larvae from one infected person to another by biting people. The video also brags about spraying insecticide to combat river blindness in 1974. And they show a clip of a helicopter seemingly spraying this river with insecticide. Remember, 1974 was the Kissinger Report year. There was a lot going on in the late 60s, early 70s with the Rockefellers and people like that talking about the need to depopulate. So I'll play the video in a second, but I just want to highlight a few things. The video claims ivermectin, quote, works like a miracle against river blindness, putting an end to infected people going blind. Well, it's not a very effective miracle, is it? The video says just 1 or 2 pills a year per person. No exceptions. Like, why did they say no exceptions? And when we combine this with what they said earlier, where they do a survey and then have to give it to everybody in the community, for them to say no exceptions, just 1 or 2 pills a year per person, I find this all very suspicious. Here's the graphic on the screen when they said no exceptions. The video ends with the line, if we stop, river blindness will come back. We must finish the job. And it emphasizes finish the job. Ooh, that is creepy. What job are they talking about? Could it be depopulation? So let's watch this video.
Once upon a time, there was a fly born in African rivers. and to live, it had to bite humans. And when it did, the fly became infected with tiny worms. When the fly bit another person, the worms entered their skin and grew up. They mated, and their baby worms migrated, causing unbearable itching and, ultimately, blindness. In Africa, children would lead their blinded elders with sticks. Millions of people were affected. Millions of acres were uninhabitable, trapping people in poverty. Something had to be done about this little fly. 1974. Something was done. Using helicopters, spraying insecticides into rivers in 11 African countries. It was called the Onchocerciasis Control Program. Where it was tried, it worked. The disease stopped spreading. People returned to farm. But the existing infections carried on. 1990. 11 of 30 countries had been treated. 19 more countries to go. Then a drug used to fight heartworm in dogs is re-examined. Turns out, in people, it works like a miracle on river blindness, killing the larvae, preventing new infections, stopping the itching immediately, putting an end to infected people going blind. Merck donates all the pills needed to control the disease. Just 1 or 2 pills a year per person, no exceptions. 1995. APOC is begun to help countries identify needs and satisfy those needs. From there, the communities take charge. Thanks to many donors, smart organizations, determined countries, the infected are better. Communities are transformed. Today, all affected countries in Africa are being treated at a fraction of the cost. Less money is going further. Some areas are now free of the disease, and treatment has stopped. The success is unprecedented. Could this be the end of river blindness? By 2025, we can eliminate river blindness, but APOC is scheduled to end. If we stop, river blindness will come back. We must finish the job.
Finish the job. Isn't that eerie? Who believes these people? All of these same parties that were trying to depopulate the world. Kissinger's World Population Plan of Action, genocide. Now they're trying to save Africans. They say they're trying to save people's lives. I don't think so. So extremely suspect all around. Especially 1974 spraying insecticide into the river. I wouldn't be surprised if that's why people were going blind. And by the way, whenever they have severe side effects, they always say, oh, that's the parasites. We killed all the parasites, and that's the problem. They're like, yeah, you got into a coma from this pill, but actually it wasn't the pill, it was the parasites we killed with the pill. These people are manipulating us, lying to us, and sterilizing us. Now, I saw this as well, UNICEF, which is also, of course, listed in the Kissinger Report, the Worldwide Population Plan of Action. There's this article in Forbes that was, quote, a paid story, a paid program. UNICEF is working with partners to keep children and communities safe and healthy. It starts with the bite of an infected black fly. So isn't that interesting? So very similar talking points. This came out in the summer of last year. Forbes apparently just let UNICEF buy this article. And in this propaganda piece, UNICEF says ivermectin was deployed in mass in Nigeria by 109,000 community-directed distributors. And they quote this man, Joseph Easy, if you believe UNICEF, if you believe propaganda. He said, "I wish I had this knowledge previously, especially about the medicine called mectizin. My child wouldn't have died." And they say that this was a quote after attending a community outreach session run by UNICEF trained leaders. It goes without saying that UNICEF cannot be trusted to properly capture African sentiments with this cherry-picked quote. And in this Forbes article that UNICEF wrote and paid to be published, they talk about themselves in the third person. A UNICEF partner since 1991, the pharmaceutical company Merck & Co. donates mectizin, originally known as ivermectine, to fight river blindness. Merck works with UNICEF and other organizations to distribute the drug free of charge to all who need it. And I have to point out, UNICEF is Latin for one head. Look who else puts out propaganda scaring people about parasites. Bill Gates, on Gates Notes.
I'm in the world's foremost parasite museum here in Tokyo.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. It's kind of cool, it's kind of gross. In history, there was a lot of parasitic infection in all countries. Fortunately, a lot of that's been eliminated, but it's great for people to come and learn about the burden that's there and the great work that's going on. More than 1 billion people in developing countries suffer from parasitic diseases, including guinea worm, sleeping sickness, elephantiasis, river blindness. These are the so-called neglected tropical diseases. There's a few, like guinea worm, that's down to very small numbers. We have others that we have very good tools that the drug companies actually donate the drugs, and people take these drugs that will clear them, and so the burden is going down slowly but surely. My favorite part of my visit was seeing the world's largest tapeworm. It's 29 feet long. You don't want to have it. It's a real reminder of how parasites start small and grow big, and they're a huge drain on people's health. Because the worm is essentially taking the nutrition away. That's an extreme case, but a lot of kids, because of the worms, their ability to succeed in school's not very good. You can't thrive when you have these diseases. That's why our foundation continues to work with partners to eliminate parasitic diseases and the burdens they create. That's good.
So if you want to believe that, that's up to you. I think something that's important to point out is even if, which I do not concede, but even if ivermectin is an effective treatment, if there's a side effect of the treatment of infertility, and they're making everybody in these communities take it, there seems like there might be a secondary motive at play, a little misdirection. Hey, we're here to save you with a miracle, safe and effective cure. Just take 2 pills a year for 15 years. Keep in mind, the United Nations put out this press release. The United Nations Population Fund hails Bill and Melinda Gates' $2.2 billion donation to fund population and health activities worldwide. That was in 1999. And then in 2010, the United Nations Population Award presented to Bill and Melinda Gates and Asian parliamentarians. So we're seeing ivermectin getting used a ton for COVID. And it's being pushed on people. There's these telemedicine operations that'll just ship out tons and tons of doses to people. People are buying tubes of this stuff off Amazon or at the vet shop. This is very suspicious. Seems like a psychological operation to make people sterilize themselves and reduce their own fertility. Unknowingly. I mean, they're being tricked into it. But it's really, really sad. Mexico used it a lot. Brazil, apparently 79.5% of Brazilians surveyed took ivermectin after they had COVID-like symptoms in 2022. Now, I also want to talk about the United Nations and depopulation. It seems like the United Nations and the billionaire oligarchs who control them seem much more interested in reducing the future population and reducing fertility than they are in alleviating suffering or helping people's health. And I think this quote really embodies that. This is Julian Huxley of UNESCO, the United Nations Education, Science, and Cultural Organization. Huxley said, "We must plan our eugenic policy along some such lines as the following. The lowest strata, allegedly less well endowed genetically, are reproducing relatively too fast. Therefore, birth control methods must be taught to them. They must not have too easy access to relief or hospital treatment, lest the removal of the last check on natural selection should make it too easy for children to be produced or to survive. Long unemployment should be a ground for sterilization, or at least relief should be contingent upon no further children being brought into the world, and so on. And that's a huge part of this quote, and so on at the end. So they want us to believe that these groups that were trying to depopulate the world and prevent human population growth and deprive people of health care, instead pushing birth control on them. They want us to believe they changed their evil ways, did a complete 180, and now they're saving lives, improving health. Or are these birth control methods being taught to these people under the guise of treatment? Like, oh yeah, we're here to help. This is the treatment, though, that you can get. This is the only one you can get. We're going to deprive you of everything else, except for this drug right here. We say it helps with worms, and we're not going to tell you anything about the negative fertility effects. This is so suspect, beyond suspect. Remember, Bill Gates says, I fund population control. Let's play a few clips of these genocidal eugenicist billionaires who are heavily involved with the United Nations.
When our foundation first started up, it was focused on reproductive health. That was the main thing we did because I thought, population growth in poor countries is the biggest problem they face. Well, over this decade, we believe unbelievable progress can be made, both inventing new vaccines and making sure they get out to all the children who need them. The benefits there in terms of reducing sickness, reducing the population growth, it really allows the society a chance to take care of itself once you've made that intervention. One issue that really grabbed me as urgent were issues related to population.
I do know that at this time, unless now we think of what America is going to be like in the year 2000 and do something about it to stop that pressure, we're going to reap the whirlwind. Because look at what the year 2000 will be. If the present trends continue, 115 million people, this increase in population, most of it's going to go to the cities, that's the trend. And our cities are going to be choked with people. They're going to be choked with traffic. They're going to be choked with crime. They're going to be choked with pollution. And they will be impossible places in which to live, and the explosions will be even worse.
Not doing it will be catastrophic. We'll have 8 degrees, we'll be 8 degrees hotter in 30 or 40 years, and basically none of the crops will grow. Most of the people will have died, and the rest of us will be cannibals. Civilization will have broken down. What the few people who are left will be living in a failed state like Somalia or Sudan, and living conditions will be intolerable. The droughts will be so bad there'll be no more corn growing. Not doing it is suicide. Just like dropping bombs on each other, nuclear weapons is suicide. So we've got to stop doing the two suicidal things, which are hanging on to our nuclear weapons. And global and then after that, we've got to stabilize the population. When I was born, there were
what's wrong with the population? I mean,
with too many people. That's why we have global warming. We have global warming because too many people are using too much stuff. But if there were less people, they'd be using less stuff.
I was wondering if you think it's a good idea to reduce 90% of the population because we are being overpopulated by a lot of... 90%. 80? Prince Philip said 80, sir. I go with 85.
I think 2 billion is about right.
Right, me too. Thank you.
One-child family.
Exactly. One-child policy.
And can you speak about your population control, saying you want to reduce the population to 95%? Extermination? You said you want a one-child policy, but you have 5 kids. It doesn't make any sense.
The youngest one is 40 years old.
All right, but understand.
The world population then was 3 million.
But that's what the Nazis did with eugenics, sir. They wanted to destroy humanity.
Pay detail.
In 1996, you were quoted as saying that the world should be reduced by 95% ideally.
World population?
World population, correct.
For that, I believe in stabilizing the population, but I might have said that. I don't know. 96 was a long time ago.
Yes, it was, sir. But you are the nation's largest private landowner. So wouldn't that be a contradiction?
Acres are concerned, not value. A lot of desert in there.
Yeah, but if the world is too populated, and you are the U.S.'s largest landowner, isn't that a contradiction to want the world to be depopulated by 95%?
No, because I've had about 50,000 bison on that land. I bought it so we could bring back the bison. They were at the verge of extinction.
But sir, what's more important, the human race or the human race or bison?
I saw somebody tweeted about this issue of George magazine. Yes, and you see on the cover here how it says, Bill Gates talks to John Kennedy about Murdoch, money, and world domination. My own views are those you'd expect from somebody who feels like he's been very, very lucky and that the resources under his command are really society's resources. And I have to be clever about how I'm going to funnel those back in. I fund education projects. I fund education projects. I fund population control. I fund education projects. I fund population control.
First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, health care, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. We get to see a lot of things. We travel to Africa, meet with scientists. We see a lot of things that are going very well, things like reducing childhood death and improving the nutrition, so like reducing childhood death.
Ironically, however, the very innovations that are making possible dramatic improvements in human well-being are also creating new problems which raise the specter of an alarming and possibly catastrophic disaster to the biosphere we live in. And herein lies the dilemma that we all face. Let me illustrate. Improved public health has caused the world's infant mortality rate to decline by 60% over the last 40 years. In the same period, the world's average life expectancy has increased from 46 years in 1950s to 63 years today. This is a development which, as individuals, we can only applaud. However, the result of these positive measures is a world population that has risen during the same short period of time geometrically to almost 6 billion people and could easily exceed 8 billion by the year 2020. The negative impact of population growth on all of our planetary ecosystems is becoming appallingly evident. Unless nations will agree to work together to tackle these cross-border challenges posed by population growth, overconsumption of resources, and environmental degradation, the prospects for a decent life on our planet will be threatened. The recent UN meeting in Cairo is appropriately focused on one of these key issues, population growth. But the controversies which have erupted at the conference illustrate the problem of coming to grips with issues that are deeply divisive and which have a profound moral dimension. The United Nations can and should play an essential role in helping the world find a satisfactory way of stabilizing world population and stimulating economic development in a manner that is sensitive to religious and moral considerations. Economic growth is, of course, an inevitable corollary of a growing population and is essential to improve standards of living. But without careful coordination, unrestrained economic growth poses further threats to our environment. This was a major subject of discussion at the conference in Rio de Janeiro on the environment 2 years ago. The focus then was on sustainable growth and global development. It was pointed out at the conference that growth is most efficiently managed by the private sector, but regulation of the process by national governments and international bodies is also needed. And once again, the United Nations should certainly be among the catalysts and coordinators of this process.
And I want to conclude today talking about Gavi and some of the times UNICEF and the WHO were caught with these tetanus vaccine programs seemingly deploying immunocontraceptive serum under the guise of vaccines, causing infertility in young women. So this is a really interesting article. Tetanus vaccine may be laced with anti-fertility drug. International/developing countries. It talks about reports of women in some developing countries unknowingly receiving a tetanus vaccine laced with the anti-fertility drug HCG. And it seems that numerous UN agencies are involved with this. It talks about in 1994 in Mexico, there was a committee that had vials of the tetanus vaccine analyzed for HCG. And then it says similar tetanus vaccines laced with HCG have been uncovered in the Philippines and in Nicaragua. In addition to the World Health Organization, other organizations involved in the development of an anti-fertility vaccine using HCG include the UN Population Fund, the UN Development Program, the World Bank, the Population Council, and the Rockefeller Foundation. I mean, just see these recurring patterns. These players that keep popping up again and again and again. And then in 2014, the Kenyan Catholic bishops put out a press release after independently testing the tetanus vaccine that had been deployed widely in their country. Sponsored by the WHO and UNICEF, here's their press release in part. It says the Catholic Church struggled and acquired several vials of the vaccine, which we sent to 4 unrelated government and private labs in Kenya and abroad. All the tests showed that the vaccine used in Kenya in March and October 2014 was indeed laced with the beta-HCG hormone. So let's play a clip here of Dr. Ayub talking about the NSSM 200 Kissinger report, as well as a little bit of the depopulation agenda and this HCG vaccine scandal.
Key document number 2, and this is probably, I still shake my head at this, this may be the most notorious document in the history of the United States. And I'll show you why. It's the National Security Study Memorandum 200, Kissinger report, who was the director of the NSC and Secretary of State, submitted this document to Nixon in '74, I think, just a couple years after that Rockefeller Commission report. Now, it's interesting, Kissinger was a protege of Rockefeller. He came up through the ranks and was assisted a great deal. The focus was, again, population growth, but on the international scene, and mostly economic, not social. Their conclusions were this, and you can guess the conclusions. Growth rates are unprecedented. The lesser developed countries are growing much faster than our nations. This will threaten the U.S. imports. It will threaten our national stability, and we have to do something immediately. The tone of the document is 200 pages plus, was urgent. We have to do something now. It's critical. The sky is falling. Their goals were to have a replacement fertility in developing countries in 1985, and replacement fertility in the lesser developed countries by 2000. So they're actually going to take their program to developed countries first, and then export it to the lesser developed countries. It doesn't make sense because they're more concerned, but I think my interpretation now, knowing what I'm going to tell you next, is I think they needed to be a home base, work out this place where they had control, rather than go to a foreign land and try to work out how they're going to instill propaganda to reduce population. Let's work in our home territory. We control the media. We control the healthcare system. That was probably what they were thinking. They identified target nations they were going to use. They wanted to list multinational organizations. Legalize abortion was key. Financial incentives, propaganda, and even coercion were going to be used. The activities must not appear coercive, however. We must emphasize individual rights so they don't know what they're getting. Reproductive health was piggybacked to other general health issues, so they can take that pill of poison, and it looked, from some angles, not like poison. But look at this. They were going to emphasize sex education, women equality, daycare, improving Social Security so you won't need as many kids to help you when you retire. These are kind of the social issues that we faced for the last 50 years. Did it come out of this document? I mean, these aren't really social issues. These were government issues under the guise of social movements. Seems like that's plausible. Let's look at Gavi a little bit closer. Who are they? Their goals, it's an organization which has encompassed all the international efforts for the last 50 years, 60 years plus, to immunize the world. This was an earlier initiative, and I think the first initiative I found was 1974. UN had a program called the Expanded Program for Immunization. It went through various revisions, and it became a children's vaccine initiative in 1990. Same players, just a different organizing head. So Gavi is an organizing head of the current, the movement of the day, of all the organizations and governments that are pushing vaccination. Now, I didn't say population control. Vaccination to the third world. On the surface, there's nothing here about population control. This is, let's better the world. Their goals are to vaccinate, and this is all they do. They don't provide cod liver oil. They don't provide water, sanitation, crop, This is vaccines. This is what they do. They want to improve the health of the poorest 70th nations by vaccination, every aspect, development, implementation, and so forth. They were launched in '99 by Bill Gates with $750 million. They have over $5 billion committed. $4 billion commitment was just given this fall in September by several European nations. Their goal is 12 to 15 billion. So this isn't chump change. This is a serious organization. They want to give the usual vaccines to third world, some of the ones we don't get here, yellow fever and so forth, oral polio, which we no longer give, and any future developing vaccines, rotavirus, HIV, and so forth. This is from their website. They're comprised of government agencies in both countries, so it's bilateral, developing governments and developed governments. NGOs, World Health Organization, UNICEF, World Bank, private organizations like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and industry, the vaccine manufacturers. Now this list looks familiar. I've seen this somewhere before. Here's the NSSM statement. Here's who they said they were going to use 30 years ago to reduce population. World Bank, World Health, UNICEF, UN Population Fund, donor countries, private groups, etc. It's the same thing. Maybe a wild coincidence. But the trouble is, these two organizations are doing something that's completely opposite. NSM 200 wants to reduce the population somehow. Gavi wants to increase the population, or so it would seem. Doesn't good health promote growth? You would think. If you can't feed yourself, why would you want 10 kids? Well, let's look at Gavi a little closer. They have supporting nations, and there's the list, USA, Canada, and the Anglo-European countries. It's an Anglo organization. And the recipient nations are, I would say, non-Anglo, for the most part. And the money we're talking, Uganda, 92 million, Nigeria, 81 million. So there's some big money. And in fact, Nigeria, I will say, was number one on the list for NSSM. They were really concerned about growth in Nigeria, leading Africa. So it doesn't surprise me that Gavi is vaccinating the heck out of Nigeria. Comparing the target lists, NSSM, their targets, for Gavi, their recipients. The list isn't identical, but this is 30 years apart. So it's similar. I think no one would argue that it's a similar list of third world countries. Now, NSSM picked 13 nations. Gavi, they want them all, 70 poor nations. This is right out of the NSSM document. How is NSM going to do it, and is this what Gavi's doing? That's a good question. Quote, the U.S. also proposed to join with other developed nations in an international collaborative effort of research in human reproduction and fertility control, covering big medical and socioeconomic factors. The U.S. further offered to collaborate with other interested donor countries and organizations, and they list World Health, UN Population Fund, World Bank, UNICEF, to encourage further action by lesser developed country governments. So there we're going to do some research, science. The methods of NSSM, they wanted it to be inexpensive and safe. They wanted it to be perceived as safe, for sure. Non-physician, which means they wanted to implement this to huge populations and not enough doctors to do it. And vaccines are perfect for that. You don't have to be a physician in these countries to vaccinate. There were no ideal methods in 1974. The NSSM agreed that we don't have the right stuff to do it. It's going to take research. The usual methods would be implemented until then. Birth control, mechanical, like condoms, IUDs, rhythm technique, sterilization, ovulation disruption methods, chemically. But this thing just jumped off the page. This is from NSSM 25, 30 years ago. Injectable contraceptives for women which are effective for 3 months or more. Didn't exist back then. It sounds like a vaccine, potentially. Next question, does Gavi partners, what are their backgrounds? So we're really kind of looking at Gavi now. They're in my radar. Are these the NSSM 200 folks? So let's take a close look at who are the members. Bill Gates, what do we know? He has donated billions of dollars to abortion. And this is just some of that, but one of those jumps off the page, $2.2 billion to UN Population Fund on February 11th. That's 2/11/99. So he's donated a lot. For a man who wants to improve health, he doesn't seem to have a respect for life. Other members of Gavi I won't talk about, but there's two excellent sources on the disc, UN Population Fund and United Nations Children Fund, UNICEF. In a word, coercive population control, coercive reproductive, coercive abortion, coercive sterilization. It's just too big of an issue to tackle, but the allegations and the support of that is here. World Bank. Why are bankers involved with this? I think this, and again, it's a huge topic. World Bank is a big issue. One quote from an article written by a journalist from New York in the Reporters Collective, and this is on the disc too. Very hard to find. I had to go to the internet and go through archives to find it because the website disappeared, but there's hundreds of articles on this. It has been a matter of general understanding for years that population control policies, government directives, and actions to prevent births are made a condition for development, lending, and economic assistance. So you can guess why the bank is there. They're there to give incentives to nations who will agree to introduce population control measures, and they're there to restrict benefits in times of crisis, like famines. So there's a certain opportunity for coercion. There's one player missing from Gavi. Wasn't listed on the vaccine fund, but it was implied in the journalism piece I read. This is from an article from, again, Seattle newspaper. The Rockefeller Foundation is a member of Gavi. Gates says that taking our lead and our inspiration from work already done by the Rockefeller Foundation, our foundation actually started Gavi. He also praised the Rockefeller family's century of philanthropy, saying, it seems like every new corner we turn, the Rockefellers are already there, and in some cases they have been there for a long, long time. I was doing some research on Casey Smithburn, who was the scientist in 1931 that did the thimerosal study in Indianapolis who killed all the patients. And I found, when I was Googling, I found that his records were stored in the Rockefeller archives. So I went to their website, and it turns out he was a Rockefeller scientist. But it's interesting that the Rockefellers, who are now funding vaccine programs, who have written the Rockefeller Commission report, basically were involved with the research that introduced mercury in vaccines. And you can see the little splash screen on the right here. J.D. Rockefeller III established a population council in 1952 and played a leading role in the efforts to bring the problem of overpopulation to global attention. A lot of coincidences. National Academies tells you that at present 33 faculty of Rockefeller University are elected members of the U.S. National Academies of Science, which include Institute of Medicine. So we have this kind of very close relationship between the Rockefellers and the Institute of Medicine that looked at all these vaccine safety issues. Of course, the Rockefellers were instrumental in starting the National Academies. Next obvious question. Since Gavi's public interest is apparently counter to population growth, is there a hidden agenda, which means, are there anti-fertility vaccines? Now, we know mercury is a candidate, but I can't tell you there's a motivation. Now, this blew me away. How many people know that there are sterilizing, abortion, anti-fertility vaccines? Has anyone heard of those? I mean, and you're a savvy crowd. I mean, you guys are on the edge of a lot of stuff. I guarantee you, I mean, I can go to a medical conference. Who's heard this? I went to PubMed, which searches for journals. I just put in a general term, birth control vaccine. I found 450 papers. There are thousands of papers on birth control vaccines, and they've been in use. They're not available at the corner drugstore. There's a textbook, one of many textbooks on it, medical text. There are journalistic pieces that are trying to combat this. And this is mostly the pro-life crowd that knows about this stuff, it seems. And there's even a medical journal and a medical society in reproductive immunology. These I took from published peer-reviewed papers on who's funding some of this research in anti-fertility vaccines. Here they are. Rockefeller Foundation, Population Council, Population Council. Here's a review article in 1991 in Human Reproduction. World Health Organization Task Force on Vaccines for Fertility Regulation. I circled it was established in 1972. When was the Rockefeller Commission report published? 1972. NSSM, 1974. So it seems like they already had in mind what they were going to do. That's the implication. Here's who's doing research on immunosuppressive vaccines. Population Council of New York, big time, millions and millions of dollars. Special program in human reproduction at World Health. A big one in New Delhi, NII, that's the National Institute of Immunology, Dr. Talwar. CONRAD, which is a research and development organization in Norfolk, Virginia, and the NIH. Those are the big players. And there are others, small universities scattered here. Ohio State's one of them. And of course, when you read these articles on birth control vaccines, they're basically saying the same stuff. You know, the world's too crowded. They're not saying this is for sophisticated women who want to have, you know, long-term, intermediate-term, one-shot-fits-all sort of thing. They're intending this for developing countries. That's what the research is selling this as. The targets are the reproductive hormones. And antibodies, in case you don't know, is the innate immune system's ability to destroy something. There are proteins in the body that will find out something that's foreign, attack it, and destroy it. So the goal is to try to get the body to attack its own hormones and disrupt pregnancy. You can mess up pregnancy by the same system, but you can also attack something called HCG. Now, you all have heard of the positive pregnancy test. You do a urine or a blood test. That's a hormone called a human gonadotropin hormone, HCG. That's produced initially by the fetus in the early days. During fertilization in the fallopian tube, the fetus secretes a little bit of HCG. It readies the endometrium for implantation. It's implanted in the uterus, and then the implantation site really kicks up the hormone, and that's when it's measurable in the blood and urine. So if you can disrupt that process, you actually, one great advantage from a diabolical standpoint is the woman won't even know she was pregnant. She won't even miss a cycle. So theoretically, it would be the stealth vaccine. The studies have been around and very successful, well, reasonably successful, but what really bothers me, you can't just inject HCG into a human because the body knows, you know, it's okay, it's not my HCG, but it's not foreign enough. You have to make it more foreign to the body. So they attach it to some other carrier, and so when the immune system attacks the carrier, it'll also boost the immune system, and it'll eventually attack the HCG, learn how to recognize the foreign HCG. There are well-documented allegations of abuse with tetanus HCG in Nicaragua, Mexico, and the Philippines. So well documented that the Department of Health in the Philippines investigated this. They found that 20% of the vials they tested were positive for HCG. The World Health said, oh, it's just a contaminant. They found this out because they had a program for tetanus to pregnant women and young women, only girls, when 70% of the cases of tetanus are in men. And they were giving them tetanus shots 3 times the first month, 5 times the first year. We get a tetanus shot in the United States once every 12 months. Once every 10 years. 10 years. So it looked funny. Even to the Philippines, they go, something's not right here. It was the subject of a BBC film, a documentary. And I met Sister Mary Pilar Versosa, a wonderful woman. I met her in Chicago this year to hear the story. They gave it to young women, and the women had fouled up fertility cycles. They had vaginal bleeding, serious complications, abortions. And the vials she tested, independently of their medical society, 3/4 were contaminated. And they injected millions and millions of young women. You're curious to know what the fertility rates in the Philippines are? That's where they're going. That's where they are. There's an organized effort to give tetanus to women. They are stretching the statistics and saying this is an epidemic, of course, serious. UNICEF is sponsoring this particular program.
So thanks everybody for watching. Check out the link down below. I have all of these resources linked up in the article on timtruth.substack.com. Subscribe over there. I also have a playlist on timtruth.com linked at the bottom of this article that goes over the very important topic of ivermectin toxicity and dangers. For some reason, it keeps getting pushed on us as safe and effective. And they keep coming up with more and more reasons that we should all be taking the fertility-impairing ivermectin. It's going to be a hard pass for me. Thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day.